It started with something small, a harmless remark over coffee that should have slipped past me unnoticed. She mentioned that her trip was going to be just a quick getaway. She said she needed the break to focus, clear her head, catch up on reading, nothing more. I nodded, not thinking much of it, my mind preoccupied with the laundry list of work deadlines I had that week. It was one of those moments you barely register at the time, the kind that doesn't seem important until much later. I wasn't suspicious, not then. Why would I be? She was busy, like always. Meetings, projects, networking events, her schedule never left much room to breathe. And truthfully, I thought the trip would do her good. Everyone needs to recharge once in a while, and a solo weekend away sounded like just the kind of self-care she'd been putting off. So I smiled, wished her well, and returned to my computer, half listening as she detailed her itinerary: a boutique hotel downtown, nothing fancy, just a room with a nice view and good room service. She didn't need much. Just a little quiet time. But something in her voice that morning, maybe the way she lingered on certain words, or the faint hesitation before she mentioned the hotel, kept replaying in my mind. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I shook it off, told myself I was imagining things. There was no reason to doubt her. We'd always been honest with each other, hadn't we? At least, I thought so. When she left that Friday, she kissed me on the cheek and smiled, her bag slung over one shoulder. "I'll be back before you know it," she said lightly. I walked her to the car, waved as she drove off, and returned inside to start my day. But as I poured myself another cup of coffee, I couldn't help noticing how light her luggage seemed. For a 3-day trip, it looked as if she'd only packed enough for one night. I told myself not to read too much into it. Maybe she planned to travel light, or maybe she just didn't need much for a simple weekend away. Still, the thought lingered, an unanswered question that hovered in the back of my mind as I went about my day. I didn't text her while she was gone. I figured she'd call if she needed anything. But as the hours stretched into days, I realized she hadn't called me either. That wasn't like her. Normally, she'd at least send a quick message, "Made it safe," or "Wish you were here." Instead, there was silence. By the time Sunday evening rolled around, I was starting to feel the edges of worry creeping in. I reasoned that she was just enjoying the solitude, that she was taking full advantage of her time away from the noise and demands of daily life. But I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for a text that never came. When she finally walked through the door that evening, her face looked relaxed but slightly flushed, as if she'd been rushing. She set her bag down, smiled, and said, "Hey, how was your weekend?" "Fine," I said. "Yours?" "Good. I feel refreshed," she replied, leaning in to kiss me. I really needed that time away. I nodded, studying her face. She looked normal. Maybe a little more tired than I'd expected, but otherwise fine. I didn't want to start a fight. I didn't want to come across as paranoid. So I said nothing. But later that night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I noticed her phone buzz on the coffee table. She glanced at it quickly, then turned it face down. It wasn't unusual for her to be discreet about work messages, but in that moment, it felt like something more. My curiosity burned in the back of my mind, but I pushed it aside. I told myself it was nothing, just a harmless message, probably from a coworker. But the silence between us felt heavier than usual, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. The feeling didn't go away. I spent the next day convincing myself it was all in my head. There was nothing to suggest she'd lied to me. People forget to text. They leave their phones on silent. They get caught up in the moment. She told me she went alone, she looked tired but content when she returned, and she hadn't hidden anything from me, or at least, I thought she hadn't. But the more I replayed our brief conversations about her trip, the more I noticed little gaps in the story. Normally, she loved to recount every detail: what she ate, where she walked, a funny encounter with a staff member. This time, she was vague. She mentioned the weather, a book she'd started reading, but not much else. No anecdotes, no vivid descriptions. It was unlike her, and that stuck in my mind. I finally asked her about it that evening. How was the hotel? Did it live up to the reviews? She paused for just a fraction of a second before answering. Yeah, it was fine. Nothing fancy, but nice enough. Did you check out the restaurant? I pressed gently. You mentioned they had good room service. I didn't feel like eating out, she said quickly. I just ordered up to the room. Quiet night in, you know? Her answers were short, almost rehearsed. She wasn't lying, not exactly, but she wasn't giving me the whole picture either. I told myself not to push, not to turn a harmless trip into a source of tension. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she didn't think it was worth talking about. Still, that nagging feeling wouldn't let go. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, I tried again. You didn't take any pictures, did you? She glanced at me over her shoulder, her brow furrowing slightly. Why? Just curious, I said, keeping my tone light. You usually come back with a dozen photos, at least. She hesitated, then shrugged. I wasn't in the mood for pictures. I just wanted to relax. Her words made sense. They really did. But the hesitation before she spoke, that gave me pause. She was a person who lived through her camera lens half the time, capturing everything from sunsets to appetizers. For her not to take a single photo felt off. I didn't say anything more, but my unease only deepened. The next day, I decided to let it rest. I didn't want to be the person who questioned every little thing. She'd said she went alone. She'd said it was a quiet, uneventful trip. I needed to trust her. But that evening, as I was clearing off the kitchen table, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out of her laptop bag. It was partially crumpled, as if it had been shoved in hastily. I wouldn't have given it a second glance, except for the bold hotel logo printed at the top. Curiosity got the better of me. I unfolded it, quickly scanning the contents. It was a reservation confirmation. For a suite. A suite for two. I stared at the paper, my heart pounding in my chest. The dates matched her trip. The hotel name matched what she told me. But a suite for two? That didn't make sense. She'd said she went alone. There was no mention of anyone else joining her. I tried to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe the hotel had given her an upgrade. Maybe it was a mistake in the reservation system. But deep down, I knew something didn't add up. I put the paper back exactly as I'd found it, my hands trembling slightly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with possibilities. Who was the second person? Why hadn't she told me? Was there a perfectly reasonable explanation she just hadn't thought to mention? Or was it something else, something she didn't want me to know? The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that I needed to confront her. But the thought of asking her outright terrified me. What if I was wrong? What if I'd misunderstood? What if, by bringing it up, I made things worse? I told myself I'd give it one more day, one more chance to see if she'd volunteer more details. If she didn't, I'd have no choice but to ask. I waited the next day out, giving her every opportunity to bring it up. The paper burned in my mind like a fuse that had been lit. It felt heavy, waiting there in her laptop bag, quietly challenging the story she'd told me. I didn't ask about it right away because a small, fragile part of me still wanted her to explain it first. To say, oh, I forgot to tell you, there was a mix-up with the reservation, or, I ended up upgrading because the room I booked wasn't available. Something. Anything. But nothing came. She went about her day like usual, cheerful and relaxed. She asked about my work, sent a funny meme to our group chat, and suggested we order in that evening. It was all so normal, so perfectly unremarkable, that I almost convinced myself to drop it entirely. Maybe I was making something out of nothing. Maybe I'd misread the confirmation. Maybe the reservation defaulted to 2 guests even if she was alone. By the time we were halfway through our dinner, I had all but decided to let it go. But then, out of nowhere, she mentioned the trip. You know, the hotel had the best pillows, she said, laughing. I actually slept better there than I do at home. Her voice was light, easy. Too easy. Oh? I asked, trying to sound casual. Did they leave a mint on your pillow too? She chuckled, shaking her head. No, but the sheets were amazing. You would have loved it. You would have loved it. The words sat heavy between us. I wanted to laugh, to keep the mood light, but I couldn't. My mind went back to that paper, the suite for 2. The laughter died in my throat. Why didn't you mention it before? I said, my voice more serious than I intended. You know, the suite. Her smile faltered for a split second before returning. What do you mean? I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. I mean, you said you were staying in a regular room. But I saw the reservation confirmation. It was for a suite. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw something in her eyes, surprise, maybe, or a flicker of discomfort. Then it was gone, replaced by a practiced calm. Oh, that. Yeah, I meant to tell you. They upgraded me when I checked in. Said they had extra suites available. Nice, right? Her explanation made sense. too much sense. It was so quick, so neatly packaged, that I didn't have time to fully process it before she moved on. Honestly, it was a little too big for just me, she added with a laugh, reaching for her drink. I kept losing my book. I smiled faintly, nodding as if the conversation had eased my concerns. But it hadn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that her response was too polished, too prepared. I knew her well enough to notice the subtle shifts in her tone, the way she avoided meeting my eyes for just a moment too long. She was trying to make it sound normal, to smooth over any suspicion. But in doing so, she only raised more questions. Later that night, as we settled on the couch to watch a movie, I kept replaying the conversation in my mind. Her upgrade story seemed plausible enough, but the suite still bothered me. If she was telling the truth, why hadn't she mentioned it earlier? Why wait until I brought it up? And why, when I asked, did she seem so ready with an answer? I glanced over at her, watching the way she laughed at a scene on the screen, her face relaxed and content. For a moment, I thought about leaving it alone, about just accepting her explanation and moving on. But the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. I couldn't help feeling that there was more to this than she was letting on. I just didn't know how to get her to tell me what it was. And the longer I sat there in silence, the more I realized that the only way forward was to keep asking, to keep pressing, until I finally got the truth. The following morning, I woke up with a fresh resolve. Her explanation about the suite still hung in the back of my mind, plausible but incomplete. As we sipped our coffee in the kitchen, she was her usual, cheerful self. She told me about a funny conversation she'd had with her coworker, teased me for adding too much sugar to my cup, and moved on to discussing weekend plans. To anyone else, it would have seemed like a perfectly normal, happy start to the day. But for me, every moment felt like another step toward the confrontation I couldn't avoid. I decided to approach it carefully, without jumping straight into accusations. "Hey," I said as she rinsed out her mug. "About your trip." She turned to look at me, her expression open and calm. "Yeah? Did you run into anyone you knew while you were there?" Her brow furrowed slightly, but she shook her head. "No, why?" "Just wondering," I said lightly. "I mean, you mentioned how quiet it was, but I was curious if you happened to bump into someone from work or an old friend." "Nope," she replied, her tone breezy. "It was just me, enjoying the peace and quiet." I nodded, taking another sip of my coffee. "And you didn't have any visitors or anything?" She smiled faintly. "Nope. Just me." Her answers came quickly, as if she'd been expecting the questions. And maybe she had. She wasn't defensive, but there was a carefulness to her tone, a deliberate calm that put me on edge. I didn't want to push too hard and risk a fight, but I couldn't leave it at that either. "That suite must have felt huge if you were by yourself," I said, trying to keep the conversation casual. She nodded, chuckling softly. "Yeah, it did. But it was nice to have the space." "Sure," I said. "Though, I guess it's a little unusual for them to upgrade someone to a suite for no reason." She paused, her hands stilling as she dried them with a towel. "It happens sometimes. Maybe they had a lot of vacancies that weekend." "Maybe," I said. "Did they tell you why they upgraded you?" Her eyes flicked toward me, just for a moment. "I didn't really ask. They just offered, and I said yes." I nodded slowly, letting her answer hang in the air. She picked up her phone from the counter and started scrolling, the conversation seemingly over. But her movements felt a little quicker than usual, like she wanted to move past the topic as fast as possible. As the day went on, I replayed her words over and over. I wanted to believe her, to trust that her explanation was genuine. But something about the way she answered, too smooth, too convenient, kept gnawing at me. I knew I had to bring it up again, but I also knew that I needed to approach it carefully. If there was something she wasn't telling me, I had to find a way to uncover it without driving a wedge between us. When I finally worked up the courage to ask her again that evening, she was in the living room, reading on her tablet. I sat down next to her, taking a deep breath. "Look," I said, "I know I've brought this up before, but I just need to ask, was there anyone else with you on that trip?" She looked up from her screen, her brow furrowing. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because," I said carefully, "something doesn't add up. The suite, the hesitation when I asked about it, it just makes me wonder if you're not telling me everything." Her expression shifted, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I already told you, I went alone. The suite was an upgrade, nothing more. I don't understand why you're so hung up on this." "I'm not trying to accuse you," I said gently. "I just feel like there's something you're not saying." She set the tablet down, her posture stiffening. There's nothing else to say. I went on the trip by myself, I got upgraded, and I came home. That's all there is to it. Her words were firm, her tone leaving no room for argument. I wanted to push further, to ask why she hadn't mentioned the upgrade before I brought it up, why she seemed so careful about her answers. But the look in her eyes stopped me. She was clearly frustrated, maybe even hurt, and I didn't want to make things worse. Okay, I said finally, backing off. If that's what happened, then I'll trust you. She nodded once, picking up her tablet again. Good, she said, her tone clipped. I left it at that, not because I felt satisfied, but because I didn't know what else to do. The knot in my chest hadn't eased, and the question still lingered. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that the suite was just a coincidence, that her hesitation was nothing more than a reaction to my persistent questioning. But as I sat there watching her read, I couldn't help wondering if I'd ever really know the full story. A few days passed, and I tried to settle into a sense of normalcy. On the surface, it seemed like things were fine. She was cheerful, engaged, even more attentive than usual. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed that our brief, tense conversation had resolved everything. But deep down, I knew it hadn't. Not for me, at least. Every time I looked at her, I found myself searching for clues, for anything that would confirm or deny the doubts I couldn't shake. She'd sit across from me at the dinner table, laughing about something that happened at work, and I'd smile along, all the while wondering if her lightheartedness was real or if it was just a performance. Each night, as we settled into bed, I felt the space between us like a physical weight, a silent question hanging in the air. I told myself to trust her. After all, I had no solid evidence to prove she'd been lying. A suite for two could have been an innocent mistake, a simple upgrade she hadn't thought much about. People hesitate when they're caught off guard. That didn't mean she was guilty of anything. And yet, every rational argument I made against my own suspicion felt flimsy. The doubt had taken root, and it wouldn't let go. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, she mentioned a friend from work, a name I'd heard a few times before but didn't know well. You'd like them, she said, rinsing a dish. They're funny, and we have the same taste in music. Oh yeah. I said, trying to sound casual. Do you see them often outside of work? Not really, she replied, her tone light. Just occasionally, like at company events. I nodded, drying a plate. You ever talk to them about that trip? You know, the one to the hotel? She paused for a fraction of a second, then glanced over at me. Why would I mention that? I don't know, I said, shrugging. Just curious if they knew you were taking time off. She shook her head, smiling faintly. I don't think I even told them. I barely mentioned it to anyone. It was just a quiet little getaway. Her answer made sense, but I couldn't help noticing the brief pause before she spoke. It was like a tiny fracture in the otherwise smooth surface of her explanation. I filed it away, not wanting to push further just yet. Later that night, as I sat in the living room flipping through channels, I replayed the conversation in my head. The way she'd hesitated, the careful tone she used, it all pointed to something she wasn't saying. I knew I was running out of excuses to avoid confronting her directly. If I wanted answers, I had to be willing to ask the hard questions, even if it meant uncovering something I didn't want to hear. The next morning, I decided to try a different approach. I asked her about the hotel itself, the staff, the amenities. She answered my questions smoothly, describing the comfortable bed, the friendly front desk clerk, the excellent room service. But when I mentioned the suite again, she grew quiet. Do we have to keep going over this? She said, her tone clipped. I've already explained it. They upgraded me. I didn't ask for it, it just happened. I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, I said carefully. I just can't shake the feeling that there's more to the story. There isn't, she said firmly. I went alone, I stayed in the suite, and then I came home. That's all. The finality in her voice made it clear she wasn't going to say any more. I nodded, though the knot in my chest remained. Okay, I said quietly. If that's what you're telling me, I'll believe you. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Good. But even as we moved on with our day, I couldn't stop the thoughts from circling in my mind. Her answers were too polished, too prepared. I wanted to believe her, but every instinct I had told me that something still wasn't right. I told myself I'd wait a little longer, watch for anything else that might give me a clearer picture. But I knew that I was only postponing the inevitable. I couldn't ignore the doubts forever. I couldn't do it anymore. The tension was eating away at me, and the doubts refused to fade. No matter how many times I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that I was overreacting, the unease only grew stronger. I knew I had to lay everything out, every question, every feeling, no matter how difficult it might be. One evening, after dinner, I asked her to sit down with me at the table. She looked surprised but didn't resist, setting her phone aside and leaning forward slightly. "What's on your mind?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "I need to be honest with you," I said. "I've been struggling to let go of the trip. The suite. I know you said it was an upgrade, and I know you said you went alone, but I can't help feeling like there's more to the story." She frowned, her expression guarded. "I don't understand why this is still an issue. I've told you everything." "I hear what you're saying," I said carefully. "But there are things that don't add up. I found the reservation confirmation, and it wasn't just for an upgrade. It was listed as a suite for two. That's not something you mentioned before." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked down at the table, her hands folded tightly. "I didn't think it mattered," she said quietly. "I thought you'd just trust me." "I do want to trust you," I said. "But I need to understand why the reservation was made that way. Was it really just an upgrade, or is there something you haven't told me?" Her silence felt heavy. She stared at her hands for what felt like an eternity before finally speaking. "I didn't know how to explain it," she admitted. "When I made the reservation, I thought someone else might come along. But that didn't happen. I ended up going alone." Her words hit me like a jolt. "Who was it for?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She hesitated again, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Just someone from work. I thought we'd go as a group, but it fell through. I didn't want to cancel the reservation, so I went by myself." I searched her face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint that she was holding something back. She looked nervous, maybe a little embarrassed, but not like someone who was lying outright. Still, the idea that she'd planned to go with someone else, someone she hadn't mentioned until now, made my chest tighten. "Why didn't you tell me that from the beginning?" I asked. "Because it sounded bad," she said softly. "I knew it would make you uncomfortable, even though nothing happened. That's why I kept it to myself." I sat back, processing her words. "So you made the reservation for two because you thought it would be a group thing, but it didn't work out, and you ended up going alone?" She nodded, her hands gripping each other tightly. "Yes. That's the truth. I know I should have told you right away, but I was afraid it would make things worse." I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. It wasn't the explanation I had expected, and it didn't erase the doubts entirely. But it was more than she had told me before. It was something concrete, something I could try to understand. "Why didn't you just change the reservation to one person?" I asked. "I didn't think it mattered," she said. "I figured I'd just use the room as it was. I didn't think you'd even notice." Her words sounded plausible, but the damage had already been done. The secrecy, the hesitation, the days of not knowing, it all left a mark that wouldn't disappear overnight. "I appreciate you telling me now," I said after a long pause. "But I need some time to process this. It's not just about the reservation. It's about feeling like I didn't have the whole story." She nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand." We sat there in silence for a while, the tension still thick between us. I wanted to believe that her explanation was the full truth, that she had just made a bad decision in not telling me sooner. But part of me still felt the weight of those unanswered questions, the lingering doubts that wouldn't let go. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if we could fully rebuild the trust that had been shaken. But at least I had some kind of answer now, and that was a start. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And for the moment, that was enough.